Hey, what's up? This is Jeremy, and welcome to my series on making a drum and bass album on the Mate tracker in 2 weeks. I've decided to split this video up into 5 more digestible parts. The first video is going to be about the project creation and concepts, and then the samples I used and how I organized them to make them easier to find when I was in the heat of making music. The second is about starting projects, conceptually and technically, and then how I approached arrangement. The third video is all about bass sound design. The fourth is all about all the other sound design and programming builds. And then the final video will be about finishing the project, mixing, mastering, and time management. I hope you'll check out the album with the links in the video description, and I hope you find these videos helpful. Let's get started. All right, let's talk about sound design. I already mentioned the drums that I use for this mostly. All my drums are samples. We have the decoded drum and bass drums, rolling tides from Native Instruments, easy rollers, cone sounds, the Dogs on Acid amens, and the KJ Sakwa Drum and Bass and Beyond thing, which is another drum and bass sample CD. I used all those all over the place. Bass. This album is one where I really wanted as many bass sounds to be designed by me as possible. And that's because drum and bass is obviously it's half the genre. So it was really important to me that my bass sounds were not only genre correct, but also mine. I've used a lot of samples in the past for this kind of stuff, but not this time. So before I left for New York, I did a sound design session. And in that sound design session, I made 60 drum and bass basses. And I actually released these as a pack. You can get it in the video description. It's on Gumroad. And I used these basses throughout. So let's take a look at this pack real quick and some of the things I learned about making drum and bass basses on the Mate. So I made a video a while ago, it was a series on the Digitone, talking about the different types of drum and bass basses. I'm not an expert in this in any way whatsoever. I still am baffled by a lot of the sounds in drum and bass, which is why I find it such an exciting genre. I learned so much making that series, and you could too if you want to go watch it, I guess. I'll give you a speed run of what I learned and how it applies to the M8 here. There are a few different types of really classic drum and bass basses that you want to know how to make. The first one is just like a sub, a sine sub. This one's a little bit nasty. You can see in the waveform up here that it's got a bit of a square wave thing, and that's because of the clipping right here. I could take the clipping down, it would be less. So in the Mate, there's a synth called the macro synth. It is based on Mutable Instruments braids. It has a bunch of different macro oscillator types. In this case, we're using the sine triangle, timbre all the way down, the color right here for some reason, a low pass filter on, and you can hear we just get a nice sub. If I go up, you'll see that we have envelopes. I have an ADSR envelope and a cutoff envelope here. This is where we do our like envelopes and LFOs. We only have 4. So that's one thing on the Mate that makes this kind of music difficult, just from a like really crazy sound design perspective, because we only have 4 destinations for our modulation. We can do some other clever things in other places, but I didn't really do that. So 4 is all you get. So here's our sub. It's a very simple sub. There's all these little tiny sweet spots. If I turn this all the way up, you'll hear some aliasing there. Take this down. There is a wave synth in here that has a sine in it as well. It's a little crunchy, which you may or may not like. I don't know. It's up to you. Another one is the 808 sub, which is going to be a bit more kicky. You can hear that boo boo. That you need to put an envelope on the pitch, which you can see we have right here. A variation of the 808 sub is the drop sub, which has a longer pitch envelope. So there's our pitch envelope, and it just is longer. The detuned sub, this is like 2 sine waves that are kind of like slightly detuned from each other. And surprisingly, there is a macro oscillator that does it perfectly. It's called buzz. So you can hear that kind of interference that's going on there, that modulation. That is because there are like 2 sine waves interfering with each other. And yeah, so just use the buzz one. The color here is what creates that interference. I have a little bit of post distortion on here, but you don't need it. if you want to create a really like basic one. I also have some chorus on this one. You also don't need that either. And I don't think I really have anything going on here. There's like a cutoff frequency going on for some reason. Don't know why. And you can get really crazy with these if you start doing like different types of distortion to them. So this is another same engine one where I've added like some nasty distortion to it, and it sounds really cool. So once you've got your basic sounds, don't be afraid to iterate on them with different types of distortion and different types of effects. One thing to keep in mind with a lot of drum and bass cool sounds is that they'll use LFOs on the distortion. So in this case, over here, I have a basic envelope going to amp. And in amp, we have this sine wave distortion. So if I turn this up, you'll hear this is without it. Here's with it. And different types of distortion will give you different effects. A lot of these sounds in real drum and bass sounds, I'm calling my drum and bass not real drum and bass, don't feel confident about it yet, will have just this nice movement to them, this throb to them, and it's never on accident. So if you are listening to drum and bass, pay very close attention to how the sounds move and try to relate them to one of the sounds that we're talking about here, and you'll be able to at least have a conceptual idea of how they were made. So this is a throb bass. I'm not 100% sure if that's what they're officially called. It's a really simple like garage and drum and bass sound bass where it's like a square and you have a resonant filter that goes like whoop. So I could probably use a bit more resonance on this. There we go. Just a really nice sounding resonant square. Doesn't really have as much resonance as I would like, but it's the wave synth. It's using a 50% pulse wave or square wave, and then there's some clipping on it over here. You can change this if you want. Get nastier. We'll go back to the original low pass filter. We can get 303 basses on this too, which I'll show you in a bit. So that's how I would get a throb bass. One thing you may have heard right here, that this ARP command here is so cool for creating interesting little glitches. It's one thing I learned when making this pack. It's an arpeggio command. And you can just get really otherworldly sounds with it by using it on your basses. Combining techniques from previous basses. So here's a throb bass that also has a pitch drop to it. Just a little bit to give it that bit of like extra knock there at the beginning. It's a different type of throb bass. One thing you should know that is in the wave synth, which is starts off sounding chiptune, but as you go further into it, you get wavetables. There are a bunch of wavetables built into here, so we'll do wavetables, and each one has its own vibe. So a little bit of wavetable motion, just right here, will go a long way. Listen to that, it's fucking great. Always use distortion. Distortion helps the harmonics pop out, and a lot of drum and bass really loves harmonics. I'll show you in a bit when I get to the interval basses how I cheat that, but we want harmonics to pop out sometimes. We want the sounds to barely feel like they're being contained, and distortion on complex waveforms can really, really help with that. Oh, that's cool as hell. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's nice. This is one of those things I'd probably use just like a single hit going like that. Just like have my bass going like throb, 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 and then go like that with the reverb turned up. FM basses. So drum and bass and garage and UK bass music in general absolutely loves FM synthesis. Donks, you know, if you've ever heard of donk bass, like there's just tons of basses that use FM synthesis and sounds that use FM synthesis, especially in drum and bass. It's a 4-op FM synthesizer, full-on FM synthesizer. The only thing it's lacking is the amount of envelopes dedicated to each that I would prefer. In regular FM synthesis, you have an envelope dedicated to each operator, which is either your carrier or your modulator. In here, we have to choose whether or not we use one of our 4 modulation slots to act as one of those. And considering you're generally going to be dedicating one of your modulation slots to volume so that, you know, you don't have the sound just continue forever, you're not going to have a lot of options here. So, you can see I'm using 1 modulator here for level of this right here. This is second to last operator, and this is our carrier right here. So this is a modulator, and this is a carrier. These are our ratios. So if I go to here, you'll hear a change. Let me turn up the cutoff. So FM is giving us that really cool harmonic pop-out feel that we want, that tear-out feel. If I go to my modulator here, this is the envelope acting on that. And while I guess traditional FM synthesis primarily uses sine waves, we don't have to. We can use all kinds of waveforms. So again, each one of these little clusters here is one of our operators. In this case, you can see up here, I'm using A into B plus C into D. That's our algorithm. That means A and B are a FM modulating pair, and C and D are, and both of these go out individually to our mixer, so to speak. And on B here, you'll notice that I have a ratio turned up. So let me turn this up. That is what I would call a harmonic tear out. I have it set to an interval that's not our root, and it creates much more interest in your basses, especially for drum and bass, when you have an interval that is also not set to the root on top of things. You can get these really, really cool sort of like, I don't really know how to describe them. I don't speak drum and bass like officially, so I don't know what this is called. But I really, really love the sound of that harmonic popping up there. That interval there. And you can get as clangorous with it as you want. Just get really weird with it. It's fucking cool. Once you have a formula for this, once you sort of get a, like, you know, choose your algorithm and start playing around, save it, then copy it to a new instrument slot and fuck with it, because you're going to get all these variations. And a lot of the times in drop 1A versus drop 1B in a drum and bass track, what's changing is how the harmonics pop out, or like just how a sound kind of like iterates a tiny bit. Don't be afraid to play around with it. If you grab my pack from Gumroad here, you can take any one of these basses and just change a few things and have a perfectly viable new bass sound, which I think is fantastic. Crazy ass thing about the FM engine is that at some point, not only do we get these different waveforms we can use besides sine wave, we fucking got wavetables in here. So here's a wavetable. Now if I go to feedback, this is scanning through the wavetable. So all those wavetables we saw earlier in the wave synth are available to us as a operator in our FM synth, which is fucking crazy. Again, too much to get into right now, but I made a bunch of FM basses that just kind of slap. Sometimes you might just find that a particular macro synth engine kind of pops off for you. This is the Vosim one. And you'll hear that low pass filter is really important exactly where it is. So you just get that little creak on top, and that's coming from our post distortion. There are a number of different distortion or amp types in here. Anything that doesn't say post happens before the filter. Anything that says post happens after the filter. Distortion before and after filter makes a big difference, especially when you have something like very resonant. This is how you start to get into 303 bass territory, because if you run a 303 into like a rat pedal or an overdrive pedal, you're obviously distorting what happens to the filter after the filter, not before the filter. So keep that in mind if you want to get a more 303-esque or just like, I don't know, harmonically poppy sound. Try turning the cutoff frequency down, turning the resonance up, using a envelope on the cutoff frequency, and distorting after the fact. That's bizarre. So here is an actual, what I call interval bass. We kind of fucked with one of those before. I'm not using any FM in this. The algorithm is set to A plus B plus C plus D. That means that there's no one modulating a carrier. It's just adding all of the oscillators out. So full, just like mix out of every single A, B, and C, D operator there. And each one of these is set to a different interval. So I have that 0.6 ratio before. Now these are not pitches. These are harmonic ratios off of the root note. So as I move them up, you're not going to hear straight up pitches. You're going to hear ratios off that root, but that's exactly what we want. This is all kind of stems from the organ bass, from the M1. I always associate this with the M1 organ bass. And so I'm always trying to like recreate that in some way. You'll notice that we have two other oscillators that are set all at one. These ones have a level on them. The ones with the ratio up have a level. So what's happening here is, hear that low throb? That's these two right here. This one and this one. That's our sub bass. And then these two have a level being controlled by an envelope right here. That does not affect the sub. So a lot of drum and bass sounds will have a very strong sub, and then they'll have like stuff going on top of it. And so this is one way that we can do that, is by having a volume envelope dedicated to a part of the FM synth that takes it out of the equation while the sub continues to go. The FM synth is going to be one of your powerhouses when making complex bass sounds in the mate. So definitely worth getting to understand. If you'd like to see a big video on it, just to tell you what I've learned, feel free to let me know in the comments if you've made it this far. This is another harmonic pop-out bass where I'm using the FM synth with no FM. Operator 1 here is set up to 11 as the ratio, and then the rest of this is all set down to 1. And I have a envelope on that one there, on the first one, and it's creating that interval up. So I can change this to anything, really. It sounds better up there, doesn't it? That's cool. And then we have some nasty wave shaping. This is what it sounds like without it, which actually is kind of valid as well. That's a pretty cool sounding bass, but that gives it that nasty distress. There's always this like, sounds like the speaker cone is blowing with some of these drum and bass sounds, which I really love. Okay, Reese's, a really, really classic bass that was actually from a sampled sound, strangely enough. It's basically a super saw, which is a bunch of detuned saws in a stereo format. Really rich sound with the low pass filter down. That's the basic Reese. We can get really crazy with Reese sounds. So for this, I use the Hypersynth. The Hypersynth is a hypersaw synthesizer. I turn up the width, which turns up stereo image, and a little bit of swarm. Not too much though, because then it sounds like that. Here's what it sounds like with the low pass filter up. And you'll take this down, and you'll hear that it's kind of this low, threatening throb. Very, very classic. And it doesn't have to be threading at all. In fact, it's very, really common for really like emotional liquid drum and bass. I can't believe it's taken me this long to mention this, but a lot of these sounds would be nothing if it wasn't for the fact that every single instrument that you make on the Mate can have its own dedicated parametric EQ now. It's so huge. So here's a sound. Go into the EQ. A lot of the times I'm going to be shelving or dipping out the mids for these sounds, and this is no exception. This is a bit of the high mids, but really big difference there. It's such a clean genre. There's usually not a lot of mids in it, it feels like. This one, I'm using a band stop effect. A band stop is essentially a one-pole phaser. So it kind of looks like this, with the band being variably wide. It's kind of doing this right now. See how cool that sounds? That's kind of what it's doing right now. No low pass filter on this, but you'll notice that it has this hypersynth as well with swarm and width up. And I'm using a pitch envelope on this to give it that like kick sound, that aggressive boof, boof, boof. If you ever feel like your sounds aren't quite punching enough, try a really quick pitch envelope right at the beginning. They'll go punk, 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 and it will just kind of like punch through a bit more. This Reese is not even using the hypersynth, it's using the FM synth. 303 basses are possible. I just use the wave synth saw, and I use heavy resonance on the filter. Obviously I use a filter envelope, and I use distortion afterwards. Little tiny bit of attack is really important to get that wah sound. Wah, wah, wah. That's enough for bass design. Honestly, there's so much I could go over here, and I want you to learn. It's called The Science. It's on Gumroad. If you want, it's not expensive. It's like $8. I don't think that's expensive. And all of this will be in there. You can fuck around with it and use these presets and learn from these presets if you want. But that's a little bit of what I learned about bass sound design while making this album. I talked about those Native Instruments preview files earlier. If you're ever sort of like, oh, I just don't know what to do for this bass, you know, grabbing a one shot and running it through the post-processing thing that we talked about here. In fact, I'll just go ahead and do that now. So that's cool as hell. Volume. Come down here, turn on the filter, turn the low pass down, the resonance up. And what I am going to have to do is detune this upwards. There we go. It's a little low. And then I'm going to give this a filter envelope as well. And then let's go ahead and get it some after distortion. Running them through the effects that you have here can make a whole new sound. So there's a nasty ass 808 sample I just loaded. Like, you can do all kinds of fun stuff with it. So don't be afraid to use samples as starter points for your things as well. There is the ability to do sidechaining on the Mate. If I go here and change this to trig envelope, I can actually set this to volume, and you see source. I can pick a source. This is any one of my instruments that I have available to me. The issue with this is that once you stop the track, you will never hear the sound, even if you try to trigger it, because you'll never hear it unless the sidechain source kicks in. I don't know how to get around that. It's not ideal, but you can do basic sidechaining in the Mate with this trig envelope. Generally what you do is you like turn hold all the way up and just turn attack up until you get the amount of sidechain pump that you're looking for, and then pick your source for that, usually some kind of kick or snare or usually kick that's happening in the track at the time. But when that kick's not happening, you'll never hear the sound. It means that you might need to make a version of it for when you are not playing the kick. But even if you just want to like edit the sound, you'll always have to edit it with the kick playing unless you turn off this envelope. So I don't know a way around that. Leave a comment if you do. All right, so that wraps up this video. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out the links in the video description for a link to the album, which contains the Mate bundles for you to learn from. I'll also put a link to my Mate bass pack and a link to the playlist for this and my other Mate educational videos if you are interested in that. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.